Hi there, and welcome back to another edition of ScaleUp Radio, the podcast inspired by the Entrepreneurial ScaleUp System and designed to make navigating our scale-up journeys that little bit easier by learning from others' experiences. I'm Kevin Brent, and this week on the show, I'm joined by Joe Seddon. And Joe is the founder and CEO of Zero Gravity. And Joe shares his entrepreneurial journey, starting with just £200 to build an MVP out of his childhood bedroom, leveraging storytelling to attract investors, and raising a £425,000 pre-seed round. And he emphasizes focusing on solving one key problem initially, building a strong team culture that he defined right from the very start, and hiring for values over skills, as well as many other really great tips if you listen carefully to this episode. And Joe's mission is to help students from low-income backgrounds to access top universities and careers, breaking the link between socioeconomic status and opportunity. And as he says, talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. So he's trying to break down those barriers and take luck out of the equation as much as possible. And make sure you don't miss any future episodes of ScaleUp Radio by subscribing to us wherever you like to listen to your podcast. You can also nominate a guest for ScaleUp Radio if you know someone with an interesting story like Joe's, and you can find out how to do that in the show notes below. So for now, stay tuned for Joe's insights on building and scaling a mission-driven tech startup. Let's dive right in. Welcome to ScaleUp Radio. I'm delighted today to be joined by Joe Seddon, who is the founder and CEO of Zero Gravity. So Joe, welcome to ScaleUp Radio.
Great to be on the show, Kevin. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. My pleasure. So tell us about Zero Gravity. What's it all about?
Sure. So Zero Gravity is a tech platform that powers students from low opportunity areas into top universities and careers. And the story behind the business is in many ways intermingled with my own personal journey to this point, which is I'm someone who grew up in a single parent background in a small town in West Yorkshire called Morley, which is between Leeds and Wakefield. And my mum was a speech therapist in HS, and I attended state schools. I just saw firsthand how high the barriers are for ambitious students like me from backgrounds where you don't have opportunity served to you on a plate to kind of defy the odds and break into these elite institutions. And whether it was financial anxiety, not having a large professional network, poor transport links, or going to a school under massive pressure, all these things kind of compound to create the outcomes that we all know about, which is very few people from low opportunity areas end up going to the best universities and breaking into the best careers. And I want to do something to change that, not just to kind of help the next generation of students like me, but because as I was progressing in my journey through school, university, into the workplace, I saw that this kind of concept of social mobility, about how you break that link between background and opportunity, was becoming an area which more and more people were talking about. And businesses were saying that we can't get the best talent. Universities were saying that we want to change the way we do admissions to look at kind of academic performance differently. The politicians of all stripes were saying that this was one of our number one priorities, whether it was the levelling up agenda in the UK or Build Back Better in the US. So I saw that this wasn't just a kind of social problem to be tackled, but there was kind of economic skin in the game for multiple different types of institution to get this right. And that's why I started Zero Gravity as kind of the first tech business trying to tackle this problem head on. So yeah, the story of Zero Gravity is a story of my own personal journey, but trying to tackle this new business problem around social mobility.
Great. So you mentioned economic skin in the game. So how do you create a business out of this? What's the business model? How do you make money?
So I suppose when I researched startups, raising capital, building a business plan, one of the things you're always told is work out what the market is that you're serving, the size of that market, not just in the UK, but also around the globe, and then sort of go from there. I think one of the trickinesses is that the sector I was working in was a sector where it was kind of a new emerging market in this space. Companies they're pursuing diversity recruitment, universities spending money on widening participation. But this was a very new and fresh market that was quite ill-defined and with a lack of robust data on its on its size. And I think this is one of the trickinesses for startups kind of trying to do something new. Like often you're actually operating at the intersection of a number of different markets, some of which might be very emergent. So it's not always easy to, in a sexy financial model, kind of work out the size of the opportunity. To take a kind of recent example, Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb, has spoken a lot about when he first founded Airbnb, the market that they were disrupting was the market for bed and breakfasts, which was very, very small. Over time, they actually realized that we're operating at the intersection of all these markets, and we can actually create a completely new market category in and of itself. And that's a similar journey to what I've been through on Zero Gravity. And I had some people who said that the market for democratizing access to university isn't big enough. The universities spend around £300 million per year currently on these activities. The market for corporates isn't big enough. But what I found over time is we're actually creating almost a completely new category, which was, as we sort of built brand awareness around our products, we were getting businesses for the very first time to actually think about what the commercial value was in the service that we were providing, and not just hiring people from low opportunity backgrounds because it's the right thing to do, because it unlocks productivity that boosts in your organization. And that data didn't really exist when I started 5 years ago, but it's quite abundant now. So one of our first ever commercial partners, KPMG, the big professional services firm, did a workforce study of all their employees in the UK, and actually found that even though there was barriers to employees from low opportunity backgrounds breaking into KPMG, their most highest performing senior associates and partners were people who originally came from working class backgrounds. So they got the very robust data saying, actually, this isn't just the right thing to do. This can drive the bottom line of our business. And that built a completely new service area for a business who previously wasn't thinking about this in economic terms. So I think with any startup and any product, my advice would be don't get too boxed in by the existing market size you're operating in. Because often if you're doing something disruptive and innovative, you're disrupting multiple markets, not just one. And those markets might be completely emergent and might be actually driven by your product and service rather than something that already exists.
Yeah. So what are the key revenue streams for you? It's a membership model, isn't it? Is it free to the students at school, or do they pay, or how does it work?
They're completely free at the point of use for students. So we work with people who can't afford to pay. We charge institutions that want to increase social mobility, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it drives their bottom line. So we work with big graduate employers who are hiring anywhere between 30 to 100 plus people per year. And they want to do something to make sure they're tapping into the widest possible talent pool, rather than just a small subsection of students who studied at a particular set of schools or live in a particular set of areas. And the value to employers is quite significant, not just because of those productivity gains I spoke about, but because a lot of existing activities in this area were very kind of manual and operations intensive. Because this has been treated historically as a kind of charity CSR issue, a lot of organizations have responded to it with a typical kind of CSR methodology, which is on the ground, in-person sessions. They're busing graduate recruiters across the country, they're hosting hundreds of school students in your office. That actually adds up over time. That is very operations intensive, often very, very financially expensive as well. And I've got all sorts of scare stories of organizations who've told me that they've run a weekend event for students in their campus, and it's ended up costing the organization hundreds of thousands of pounds. And that is money which, in my view, is far better spent on a digital solution, which is more focused on actually having an impact. Now, how do you actually get students into these organizations and tangibly increase their chances, rather than just doing something that looks good on a leaflet or in a kind of executive summary of a company report?
Very good. So what? I mean, you came out of Oxford University with a double first. I think you probably had corporates queuing at your door, offering you jobs, I would imagine, and yet you went straight into setting up Zero Gravity, I think, didn't you? So what drove you to do that?
Even though I grew up in Morley in West Yorkshire, which was a small town with no real kind of entrepreneurial history in the tech sector, at least. I was somebody who always kind of had a deep ambition that I wanted to create products that would change people's lives. I know that sounds quite grand, but I grew up in a period where so many tech products were transforming every facet of my life. You know, whether it was Facebook when I first went to school, or then Snapchat, Instagram, WhatsApp, Uber and delivery when I was at university. So I was a kind of digital native Gen Z who couldn't help but notice how technology was affecting all these things. So I wanted to be part of that. And I was a bit of a weirdo when I got back from school in the evening. I'd listen to all these Silicon Valley podcasts. And even though that world felt a long, long way away from Morley in West Yorkshire, it did sort of give me a sense about what was going on and kind of tickled my taste buds in terms of maybe one day I could be someone who helps build the products that people actually use. So I always had that ambition, but like many people, I got to university and I was kind of told by people in my friendship circle, professors, my mum as well, that the kind of route you have to take is to go down the kind of steady corporate career, and then what you get from that is kind of almost guaranteed financial stability and prosperity, and that culture was very tightly ingrained. You had all these people going to Oxford who were very hardworking and intelligent, but they didn't want to take any risks. They wanted to take the straightforward career into consultancy, financial services, and the legal profession. But I knew that wasn't for me. No, I did a legal internship. I got a training contract offer, but I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I decided to take a big risk. And when I graduated, I turned down my graduate job offers, and instead I went back to my childhood bedroom in Morley in West Yorkshire and launched my business, which sounds like a romantic fairy tale now, but at the time was an incredibly risky decision and one that had quite a lot of social repercussions. Now, my friends thought I'd gone completely crazy. My mum wasn't very happy with me, in all honesty, for sort of throwing away this very stable, clear path. And it kind of introduced to me early on just how many different social pressures there are against early stage entrepreneurs. And I think we live in a country which celebrates established entrepreneurs, but does not celebrate the kind of little guy starting out. And I saw a lot of resistance, even from people who had my best interests at heart and knew me the most. And I kind of tell the joke, but for a long time, even after I'd started Zero Gravity, when I mentioned what I was doing, I think people thought that describing myself as an entrepreneur was like an innuendo for unemployment. And the people would always say, how's your project going? It took a long time for people to actually understand that this could be something that was the established business that could grow and could scale. And it's only when you have the kind of trappings of sort of success and credibility that people realize that. But it takes time to get there. And there's a lot of social pressure, even for the people who hold your interests in their hearts. So I think that cultural aversion to entrepreneurship is deeply instilled in the British psyche. I think it's better in other countries, notably the US. But I found that a big challenge when I got going, to be honest.
Great. So take us through some of those early stages then, because I think did you found Zero Gravity about 6 years ago? Was it something like that?
Yeah, after I graduated in sort of June, July time of 2018.
Yeah. So take us through those early days. Then you're operating out of your old bedroom. You've used your last £200 of your student loan to get it off the ground. So how did you get it from there then to where you were starting to be taken seriously with what you were doing?
I wasn't somebody who grew up in a background surrounded by professionals, let alone high net worth. So the idea of kind of raising so-called friends and family funding to kind of invest in the business and get it off the ground was just not something that was on the table for someone like me. And if I did a whip round of my friends and family, I might be able to raise around 20 quid and a bag of skips. So yeah. I did have the kind of friends and family route to go down. So I just had to make do with what I had. And as you mentioned, I had 200 quid left for my student loan when I graduated from university. And I had a choice, do I spend this on a couple of nights out with my mates, or do I put it for productive use? And I thankfully decided to go with the latter. And 200 quid is not a lot of money. That is not enough money to kind of grow a business in the long term. But what it does enable you to do is get something off the ground. And what I did is essentially I deployed my 200 quid and my kind of time and energy to build a minimum viable product to sort of show that the idea of zero gravity could actually work in the real world. So like what that looked like was, buying a domain name, getting web hosting, starting to build a very basic platform that identified top talent from low income backgrounds. And I knew that I couldn't sort of change the world overnight. So rather than trying to put my entire idea into practice straight away, I just focused on trying to prove a particular slice of it. So rather than trying to get loads of students into all sorts of top universities and top jobs, I just focused at the beginning on getting students from low income backgrounds into Oxford and Cambridge University, because it gave me a very clear focus area to prove this concept out. And from a tactical point of view, I knew two things. A, I knew that this was an ecosystem which I understood the best because I'd been through it myself. So there was less of a kind of learning journey to go on in terms of working out how to do that. And the second thing I knew is that there was so much kind of fascination and also almost fetishization around this area of kind of rags to riches. How do you take someone from a low income background into a sort of posh, prestigious university like Oxford or Cambridge? I knew that if I could get it right at those two institutions, that would create a huge amount of momentum, which I could use to then expand the business. And indeed, that's what played out. In the kind of first year, the platform supported around 150 students from low-income backgrounds, and 50 of those got an offer to study at Oxford and Cambridge, often becoming the very first person in their family to go to university. They're one of the first people in their school's history to go to Oxbridge. And from that, I got some incredible case studies of success stories coming out of the platform that were picked up by the kind of mainstream media and created this kind of PR awareness sort of virtuous cycle that then unlocked all sorts of doors that were just completely shielded from me beforehand. So I think that's a real key lesson. Like, don't try and be an overnight success. Just focus on one kind of sliver of the problem you're trying to solve. But choose that sliver tactically, not just in terms of giving yourself the best chance of proving your concept, but doing something that's going to build enough momentum to get to the next stage.
Nice, very good. So how did you find those 150 low income background students?
So you can't really do any paid media with a budget of 200 quid, which I used to start off. So it was all organic, and I just hustled. I used a SaaS platform to create a sort of branded marketing video that brought the concept to life of what I was building. I mean, I literally just put it out on my own Facebook channel, my own personal Facebook channel, and got all my friends to repost it. And from that, I got quite a degree of organic traction. And that was enough to, get that first 150 users. So I think it's really important to realize at the beginning, when you are heavily resource constrained and have no brand awareness, you have to really hustle to get something off the ground. There's that old Y Combinator phrase, which is, do things that don't scale. That is very, very applicable when you start. But the things you have to do to get yourself from zero to something are completely different from what you do to scale from something to something much bigger. So I did all sorts of things that I would never do now that the business is established, but were the right things to sort of get me off the ground. And sort of posting on my own Facebook profile is just one example of doing that.
Great. So you got a bit of momentum. You got some PI from your case studies. So how did that then? What was the next sort of key milestone, would you say, then in your journey?
So with PR, it all comes down to how you actually use it. And the PR we got about zero gravity was not just about the product and its outcomes, but was also connected to my own personal story. I realized quite quickly, if you want to get people's attention, most people aren't going to be interested in the intricacies of the technology you're building. Now, however much you enjoy the area as a founder and the kind of the R&D around it, 99% of people don't care whatsoever. What they care about is stories. And what I did is I connected the story of my business to my own personal journey. And the reason that's important is when we started getting PR, I started to get lots of interesting people who approached me and said, no, I want to help you with your idea. Not because necessarily they thought the product or the technology I was building was next level, but because they were kind of inspired behind the story behind the business. And that is what enabled me to raise, my first ever round of funding. I raised the pre-seed round of £425,000. And pretty much all of the people who invested in that round were angels who, through one connection or another, had come from that original bout of PR that we got. So with PR, it's all about doing it intentionally. That I deliberately constructed storytelling to open doors and to build a network that I just didn't have beforehand. So getting angel investment was just completely out of reach for me at the start of my journey. And I didn't have the network, didn't have the contact book, didn't have the understanding. But PR created the flywheel for me to get there and unlock that access to the sort of scale up funding, which you actually do need if you want to take a minimum viable product and get into the hands of more people.
What did you learn? Looking back on it from that pre-seed round, raising 425k. What takeaways would you give to others?
One of the things I learned was the importance of network and relationship building. When I first started to raise investment, I kind of assumed that it was similar to what you're taught in textbooks when you study economics and finance at university, which is, people want a perfectly articulated business plan and they want a financial model and budget that brings that to life numerically. And you do need those things. But for me, they are not the most important thing. You shouldn't let the tail wag the dog. But the dog in the fundraising story at the beginning of your journey is you, which is when you're building a business from the ground up and it's so early stage, it doesn't have any of the markings of kind of credibility or validation yet. The game-changing factor is going to be the founder and the strength of their vision, their strategy, and their proven demonstration to execute with few resources. And I didn't understand that at the beginning of my journey. I spent countless hours, refining investor decks, finessing models. But what I actually realized is the thing that made the difference was actually getting out and meeting people, developing relationships, letting them know who I was, keeping them updated on my business over time to kind of build up a better relationship and understanding with these people, and showing that I could also take and learn from their advice as well. I think it's for first-time founders and young founders, that's so important. The thing that's going to get you an investment is not having the most perfect package of documents. It's going to be building a network and doing some very intense relationship building. And that stands a test of time as well. We've now raised £6.5 million in total over the past 5 years of the business. And pretty much every single investor in the organization, I can sort of track through the spider's web back to some of the original people who backed me at the beginning of my journey. So that relationship building is not a kind of one-off process to get investment. That's something you should continue with over time, because if you get a great investor and backer in your organization, that's somebody who doesn't just unlock doors for now, but way into the future as well. So don't underestimate the power of networks and relationship building, just as important, if not more so, than having the perfect pack of documentation.
Great, very good. And what were those original, but also the subsequent investors? What are they buying into? What's the end game for them? What's the vision that they're buying into?
I think most early stage investors are buying into a kind of mission and vision. When I sort of did research on how to put together an investor deck, a lot of the advice is, show people how you're going to get to an exit and what does an exit look like, and quantify that for them. I think that matters when you're raising a kind of Series A or Series B round, and if you get an institutional investor in. But at the very early stage, I think what people are buying into is a mission and a purpose. So what I lent into a Zero Gravity was articulating what is the problem we're trying to solve, this problem of social mobility that affects all these different areas of life. How are we going to solve that? And then what does that mean for society? Now, I spoke a bit about that. This is what we've done at Oxbridge. We've changed the student demographic. 1 in 4 students going to Oxbridge are now coming for our platform. And that sort of creates a excitement within people if you're able to do that. And if you can articulate how that links to the commercials as well, I think at the early stage, that is enough for most people. You don't need to give very specific, financially quantifiable exit opportunities. You just need to build a kind of purpose and mission people can believe in and then show how that could potentially make a lot of money in the future. So that's why I say don't finesse your documents too much in the beginning. Don't make it too much like an investment banking style presentation. You want something that taps into people's emotion as much as you taps into people's rationality. Because if you're an early stage investor, you have to be a bit crazy. No, most people that don't have the guts to invest in 10 early stage businesses where you know that 9 of them are probably going to fail. It takes a certain type of person. So if you want to connect with that person, you need to connect with their emotion as much as you connect with their rationality. So I think you should think about that, not only in terms of how you present your business, but the materials that you put in front of people as well.
Interesting. Okay, good. And where's the, you raised 6.5 million over a few years. What's the majority of that for? What is it building the platform out? Is it creating the market? Where's the big focus been?
The significant amount has been spent on building the proprietary technology that underpins Zero Gravity's business. So at our heart, we're building a tech platform that identifies talented students from low opportunity backgrounds and powers them into elite institutions. And it's that proprietary technology that is our kind of USP as a business. It's enabled us to scale from supporting 150 students per year to now over 10,000 per year. It's allowed us to tangibly increase the success rates of students getting into these institutions. That we've evolved the product over time to sort of take students on a digital journey that actually makes them better candidates, better able to get into these roles. So the technology was a big part of the investment. But what I would say about that is it seems obvious now, but at the beginning of my journey, I faced a lot of pushback on investing in technology because tech investment is not something that a lot of people understand. No, it's essentially R&D. It's high risk. It takes time for the benefits to come to fruition. So when I told some of my first investors that I was going to plow this money into building a platform, that a lot of them were understandably very, very nervous. So what I would say to that is, as a founder, you need to have a very clear vision and strategy for not just the money you're going to raise, but how you're going to deploy it. And you need to make sure that you deploy that capital in the right way, because that is going to be the difference maker to the future of your business. I think had I taken some people's advice and not spent money on building proprietary technology and instead had lent into other areas like building a really big operations team, I don't think the business would have survived today. So how you spend the money is just as important, if not more so, than the amount that you raise. But you've got to have a clear strategy for how you're going to deploy it. And for us, that was primarily proprietary technology.
Okay. So were you setting really key, strong milestones and metrics for what you're going to do at each stage of the funding round with the money that came in?
Yeah, we almost had a high-level roadmap where we said, this is what we're going to try and achieve in the next 18 months. And then this is the 18 months after that. I think that's really useful because it allows you to show investors the bigger picture, but also hold yourself accountable for executing a particular plan. And plans change over time in startups, that you have to be agile and pivot based on the insights you're getting. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't show people a kind of 5-year roadmap of what you're trying to achieve. So I was very clear with investors that the first 18 months was going to be about developing a little bit of proprietary technology, but using a lot of leased technology as well to allow us to move quicker on the product development. But over time, we're going to make proprietary more parts of our technology to enable us to effectively scale. So I gave people a kind of picture of what that looked like. And then over time, the platform became more and more proprietary in its technology. And in the first couple of years, around 30% of the tech was stuff we developed ourselves. 70% was stuff we'd leased from elsewhere and sort of customized for our own use case. And that's changed over time, like probably around 95% of our technology now is completely proprietary and built in-house. So I think also don't have, if you are a tech founder, when you're thinking about how you deploy your resources, don't be embarrassed at the start of your journey if you use a mix of proprietary and leased technology. Because I always found that a bit embarrassing that we won't have 100% proprietary, because it was never quite as perfect as I wanted it to be. But
Yeah.
actually, you can get further quicker if you also use some lease solutions, and it does de-risk what you're building as well. Because as a lot of people find when they build tech products, the thing that you think you're building at the beginning is not the thing that you end up building at the end when you put a product out into the open and start getting consumer feedback and insights. So going on that journey from kind of zero proprietary to almost full proprietary, I think it's a key thing that we've done as well.
Okay, great. And how have you got over the kind of the valuation challenge? How much equity to give away at the various stages? How have you addressed that?
Yeah, this was something that I didn't understand at all when I first started. Like, I was like, how can someone value a business at £1 million that is not making any revenue and is essentially just a couple of slides on a PowerPoint? So this whole stuff around valuation, I really didn't understand at the beginning. Because again, I took my kind of finance economics knowledge from university with present discounted cash flows, and it just didn't work for early stage companies. So
Yeah.
I think when you're at the early stage, I think the valuation essentially should be reverse engineered, and you should be open about that with investors. If you get asked, how did you arrive at this valuation? Don't try and construct some no crazy explanation regarding market sizes or current revenues. Just be honest and say, look, we need to raise £1 million to get the business to this next stage. I'm the founder. I think a 20% dilution is fair enough to keep me motivated. And we've reverse engineered the valuation from that. That is not an economics explanation, but what it is a transparent and honest explanation. And I found that most early stage investors don't really care about valuations too much unless they're completely ridiculous. So be honest and upfront. Then once you get into a later stage business and at the Series A and B stage where you probably are generating some revenue at that point and have a clearer sense of how big the opportunity is, I think that's when you can move into a more finance-based valuation where you're looking at a multiple of revenue based on growth rates and market size and all those other things. But at the early stage, I think don't try and worry about that too much. Just give an honest reflection based on how much dilution you're willing to take and how much money you need to get to the next stage.
Very good. Excellent. So you've got quite a sizable team now, I think. Did I see mid-20s, 27, something like that?
Yeah, 27 people.
So what have you learned about taking on and managing people? You're still relatively young out of university and straight away into building your own business and having to take on and manage people. So what have you learned about that side of the business in what is ostensibly a very tech-focused business?
I started Zero Gravity as a one-man band, and for the first 12 months, I operated pretty much completely by myself. And by nature, I was quite an introverted, intellectual individual who, throughout school and university, had just been focused on how to optimize my own performance rather than to optimize the performance of other people. And taking that step of moving from that to actually building a team, building a culture, building a way of working was a huge change. And to be honest, probably the most difficult challenge that I face as an individual. I think you often get told that when you're building a startup, your business has to evolve over time. What you don't necessarily get told is how you as an individual have to evolve over time as well. You have to evolve at the same rate as your business. And for me, that meant going from being a kind of individual level contributor, optimizing my own performance, to actually thinking more and more about how do I get results through others. But when I spoke to a lot of my earliest investors, they'd always use the same phrase: you need to find a way to build leverage in your business. And I had absolutely no idea what that meant. I was completely going over my head. But I realized over time that concept of leverage, how do you get results through others, is one of your key challenges, because no individual is so brilliant that they can get results at a quicker rate than 10 fully motivated, integrated, properly aligned people together. That was a big challenge for me. And I think because I never had a proper job before, I was both disadvantaged in the sense that I didn't have any kind of proper experience or training, but also advantaged in terms of I could start from a completely fresh blueprint and not be defined by the bad practices of other organizations I've been in. And that had an impact in terms of culture, for instance, where one of the first things I did when I started building a team is I actually sat down and sort of wrote down on a piece of paper what kind of culture I wanted to build. And I was very kind of definitive and specific about that in terms of what's the mission of Zero Gravity, what are the key values of this organization. And that work I did defined our entire journey in terms of who we hired and how we operate as an organization, because I had a very clear sense of what I was trying to build. And I've seen a lot of businesses get this wrong. Now, when you see people talking LinkedIn about values, they'll throw around words like integrity and compassion and be a grafter. These are things that everyone values. For values to have meaning, they have to be things that some people don't value or even actively disagree with. So the values which I sort of came up with Zero Gravity were things that I knew not everybody would like. So like one of our values, for instance, is called stand up straight, which is to mean what you say and say what you mean. Now, I like people who are very direct, unfinessed, non-diplomatic communicators, because I think in a startup, having a very direct, critical form of communication is key, because there's so much stuff going wrong that you have to fix. And that is a value I know lots of people disagree with, because in the corporate world, you're taught to be very diplomatic and political and kind of rub people up the wrong way. And you certainly never speak in a certain way to your manager or your manager's manager. Like I despise that. Like I think people should be very direct and candid in their communication. I think for startup that's essential. So that's just an example of one value which I think has real substance, and it's incredibly important, because not only does it allow you to screen effectively in your hiring process to find people who are kind of values fit for your organization, but also allows you to clearly determine what you are. And that rubs off on people over time. And if you say, these are our 4 values, now we recruited you because you kind of expound these things and you build your kind of policies and ways of working around that, it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy over time. So I think getting that workaround culture correct is so important. It's existential for a startup. Now, you are doomed to fail rather than destined to succeed if you're a startup founder. And if you want to be destined to succeed, you have to have that top 1% culture. If you can't build a culture that allows you to get extraordinary results for other people, you're not going to get anywhere, no matter how incredible you are as an individual.
Very well said. So how do you keep that going now that so the culture, yeah, absolutely. But how do you reinforce that over time so it becomes, to a degree, self-reinforcing? But what do you do to continually get that team of 27 people really driving forward, creating those exceptional results that you're talking about? What do you do now?
It's a really good question. I think culture is also the antidote to micromanagement, because as a founder, you're going to be obsessed with your products. You're going to be a perfectionist. It's very easy to become a micromanager, but culture is the thing that essentially enables you to pull yourself out of those individual conversations, individual tasks. Because if you build the right culture, which people adhere to, you don't need to micromanage people's work, because they're already expounding the exact mission, values, and behaviors which you look for. So then the question just becomes, how do you kind of embed that culture over time and make sure it doesn't become diluted as your organization expands? That the simplest way is hiring. As a startup, you don't always have the biggest pipeline of talent accessible to your organization. That you can't afford to pay big salaries. Your employer brand probably isn't well known. But the worst mistake you can make is to hire people who do not fit with the culture of your organization. No one's skills are so incredible and worthy that it's worth making a compromise on culture for them when you're an early stage startup. So I think the number one thing you can do is make sure you hire in the image of the culture you want to create. And that means hiring essentially for values rather than just skills. But at Zero Gravity, I hired a lot of people who were quite unskilled in a way. They'd never had a job before, or they only worked in one job that had very little to do with what they'd be doing at Zero Gravity. But because I felt they were a really good culture fit, I felt confident that was a person that we could develop and upskill over time. And 99 times out of 100, that has been the case. So hire for culture and behaviors. Don't hire for skills at the beginning of your journey. I think that's step one. Big step two is be conscious about culture. Actually define what your culture is and tell people about it. So we have a culture deck, which everybody does a session on when they first join the company.
Okay.
But it's not a one-off thing. Every month we have a culture meeting, which is completely connected to the key tenets of the culture that we've said we're trying to build. And it keeps it kind of conscious over time. And people are thinking about it. It's not just something that's sort of spoken about once and never spoken about again. You kind of keep it implanted in people's minds. I think number three is your reward system needs to be tied back to your culture. So like when it comes to doing our kind of quarterly feedback to team members and like deciding on things like promotions and salaries, that's not just tied back to people's kind of job skills and their performance against their goals. It's also tied back to values as well. That we explicitly give feedback every quarter on how good a job team members are doing in terms of demonstrating the zero gravity values. So you need to tie your culture into your system for kind of rewards, because that is the kind of incentive structure that actually makes people think about how they optimize for the behaviors you want to see rather than just optimize against goals and skills. And I think the final thing I'd also flag as well is culture is intangible, but it's not completely impossible to measure. Like, there are facets of your culture you can measure. So we integrated some very simple technology into our Slack that essentially every week asks our team members 3 questions about different aspects of our culture. And that allows us to get essentially NPS style ratings across a number of different things. Now, how aligned do people feel? Like, how motivated? Do they think the mission's real? Are they getting the right support from their manager? When you get a big enough team, you can actually get really interesting quantitative insights out of that on the areas of your culture that people really buy into and the areas where you've got work to do. And getting those insights is really important to actually fix problems before they blow up and become issues that you have to manage carefully. So I think putting in place those measurement systems early doors is super important as well, to making sure that you're evolving your culture, your ways of working, your policies and processes, because inevitably you're not going to get it right straight away. And you have to find those feedback loops so you can get the correct insights to make the changes you need to see. In the same way that when you build a product, you don't just put it out into the open and not have any systems for tracking consumer insights. Exactly the same thing with a culture. But when you put your culture out into your workplace, you need to have some processes and systems for getting those insights from your team members about what's working well and what's not.
Yeah, brilliant. I love the way that you've articulated that with some really practical examples of how you can help. And I'll just add a little bit on that. We did some research amongst all sorts of businesses. As soon as you start to get a team together, once you've got 5 or more, all of the challenges that rise to the surface of the reported challenges the business owners say they're facing are around the team. It's around getting the team to behave in the way that the business owner would want them to. And nobody would argue with the fact that culture is really important. But the metrics is an interesting one. We ask people, what are the top 5 KPIs that they measure within their businesses? 4% were people measures, which it is hard, as you've said. It is difficult. So there's a reason why we might have an excuse not to do it. But on the one hand, we're saying culture is really important on the people side and all of that. We know that what gets measured kind of gets done. People say that too. But on the other hand, we've got this, where actually businesses, only 4% of them say that a people measure is in their top 5 KPIs. Well, that's a huge disconnect.
And I think to take that a step further as well, I think often the measures people use on culture and people confuse control measures with optimization measures. So if people do have measures of culture, it'll be things like absence rates or regrettable attrition or maybe even EMPS. And those are all things you should probably be looking at. But those are things you want to control. But those are things that you want to make sure you kind of get at a certain level and don't drop any lower than that. But not necessarily things you want to optimize that show you if you've got a high performing culture. Like, those things are more like, how quickly do your team members progress in terms of their skills, productivity. And those are the real key measures whether your culture is facilitating high performance or not. Not just can you minimize the level of absences and stop people leaving for regrettable reasons. So I think often people mistake control for optimization measures on culture. I think that just shows a kind of lack of clear thinking about what is the kind of high performance outcomes they want to create from the culture that they're building.
Love it. Good. So I think we've had a really good conversation, Joe. Thank you very much. I think I could keep asking you questions for the next couple of hours at least, I'm sure, but probably not the best use of our times or our listeners' times. Maybe if there's one thing that you would look back on your journey so far that you say was a standout lesson that you learned, or that you might do differently given your time again, what would you pick out?
I think at the beginning of my journey in particular, I was a young, naive founder from a background that was quite unorthodox when it came to the tech startup ecosystem. And I had a lot of imposter syndrome, in all honesty. Like, I felt like I was a little bit of a con. I was not good enough to kind of be in this sector. I didn't have the right network, the right resources, the right insights. And what I realized over time is everyone's making it up as they go along in the startup world. And then when people come onto podcasts, they'll tell a sort of very linear story about how it went from failure to success. And it sometimes looks like it was an overnight phenomenon rather than something that took 5-6 years of hustle and hard work. But I think it's just worth knowing, if you are a first-time entrepreneur, everyone's making it up as they go along. And then people rationalize at the end in terms of how they got it right. And I'm still at the start of my journey. I'm only kind of 5 or 6 years in, but that is the journey I've been on as well. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing at the beginning, and I just learned over time. And if there is one kind of fundamental law of the startup universe that I definitely do believe in, it is the power of compounding. I know it's a bit cliche. I know everyone says it now. I know everyone's read Atomic Habits and stuff like that. But I do think the number one law of the startup universe is, how can you get 1% better per week and stay in the game long enough such that you get a kind of exponential outcome from that? Because if you get 1% better per week, you're not going to be an overnight success. You're not going to see the difference in your business week to week, or maybe even month to month. But if you stay in the game 5 or 6 years like I've done, you can go from having nothing to having something. So don't worry about being an overnight success. Worry about how you get 1% better each week and how you have enough resilience to stay in the game, even when you're constantly having to take knockbacks and setbacks, which always happen at the start of your journey. So the power of compounding is the one law that I certainly do believe in the startup universe.
You do. That's great. What's the legacy that you'd like to leave with the business? What is the big end game, the big legacy you want to leave that will get you your that will add to your British Empire medal, and at the end of the day make you really recognized in the world? What's the end game?
I want to make it possible for someone like me in 10 years' time to not have to benefit from arbitrariness and luck when it comes to unlocking their potential. Now, I sit here as a kind of social mobility success story in a way. I got out of Morley in West Yorkshire, went to Oxford University, and now I run a kind of mission-driven startup employing 27 people. And yes, it took a lot of hard work, dedication, and talent, but I also had a number of bits of luck across my journey as well, which I regard as sliding door moments, which sort of changed the path I was on. And that luck and arbitrariness is there in abundance for people from low opportunity backgrounds. And if you're somebody from an affluent background, luck is taken out of the equation by having access to resources. But if you are someone from a low opportunity background, even if you do everything right, you still need a fair whack of luck to get you along your journey. So I want to scale zero gravity to the level where we take luck out of the equation. And if you are a talented, ambitious person from a low opportunity background, you do not have barriers preventing you from unlocking your potential. And I know that is a big ambition. That link between background and opportunity is as old as society itself. But I think we've got a little bit complacent in the West about our inability to kind of change things. Even thinking back 100 years, someone like me would never have got into Oxford University. I think only around 9% of Oxford's undergraduates 100 years ago were from state schools, and certainly very few of those were from small towns in the north of the UK. So things have radically changed over the past 100 years, but I feel in the past 30 years, there's been a marked stagnation. The things are no longer getting better in terms of breaking that link between background and opportunity, and that's something that I'd like to be part of changing.
Fantastic. What a great way to end, Joe. So thank you very much indeed for being my guest on ScaleUp Radio today. If people would like to get hold of you or find out more about Zero Gravity, what's the best way for them to do that?
So it's zerogravity.co.uk, or you can message me on LinkedIn. Just type in the name Joe Seddon.
Brilliant. Joe Seddon, thank you very much indeed for being my guest on ScaleUp Radio today.
Cheers, really appreciate it, Kevin.
I hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if you're building and scaling your own business, you might well be interested in our book, The Entrepreneurial ScaleUp System. And it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a practical handbook around scaling a business in a structured way. And you can order a copy on all your favorite online retailers, including an audio version, or you can find it and other supporting resources on our website, www.esusgroup.co.uk. That's esusgroup.co.uk, which is esusgroup.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.